The man looked so ordinary that nobody paid attention when he stepped onto the plane. Dark suit, thin black tie, polished shoes, tired face. But a few hours later, that same man would open the rear stairs of a Boeing in the middle of a storm, carrying $200,000 in cash before disappearing forever into the night. He bought the ticket with cash, no luggage, no hesitation. It was the night before Thanksgiving. The airport was crowded, and nobody had any reason to remember his face, until he quietly leaned toward a flight attendant and told her he had a bomb. At first, she thought it was some awkward attempt at flirting. Men slipped notes to flight attendants all the time. But when she tried to put the paper away without reading it, he leaned a little closer and calmly told her she should read it immediately. Inside the briefcase, there were no flashing lights or dramatic wires hanging loose, just red cylinders arranged neatly beside simple cables. It did not look theatrical. It looked real enough to make her stomach turn cold. The strangest part was not the threat. It was the way he behaved afterward. While the plane continued through the clouds, he ordered bourbon and soda, lit a cigarette, and stared out the window as if he were waiting for a delayed bus. At the front of the aircraft, the crew tried to act normal. Forced smiles, quiet voices, hands trembling while holding phones and writing notes. Every minute seemed longer than it should have been. When the plane landed to collect the money and parachutes, there was no panic in him, no sudden movement, no anger, only cold efficiency. He moved like someone following a routine he had rehearsed many times in his head. The passengers were released without fully understanding what had happened. Some rushed down the stairs without looking back. Others turned around one last time, trying to memorize the face of the man who had taken control of the flight. But there was already something about him that felt impossible to remember. Once the plane took off again, only 4 people remained on board: the pilot, the co-pilot, one flight attendant, and the man who claimed he had a bomb. Outside, the sky was completely black. Heavy rain covered the mountains below. Wind rattled the metal body of the plane, and somewhere beneath them there was nothing except forest, rivers, and endless darkness. He ordered the crew to fly lower than normal, slower than normal. He wanted the landing gear partially lowered and the wing flaps adjusted in a way that made the aircraft feel unstable and strange. It was as if he already knew exactly how the plane needed to move for what came next. The flight attendant stayed close to him because she had no choice. She later said his voice never changed. He never raised it, never sounded nervous. He spoke softly, almost politely, which somehow made everything even worse. Every now and then, he looked out the window into the darkness below, not with fear, not with uncertainty, but with the calm expression of someone looking for a familiar road in the distance. Somewhere behind the engines and the rain, there was a moment when the crew almost believed the nightmare might end peacefully. He had the money, he had the parachutes. Maybe he would surrender once they landed again. Maybe he only wanted to scare people. Then he told everyone to move into the cockpit and close the door. The flight attendant hesitated for a second before leaving him alone in the back of the plane. She later said when she looked at him for the last time, he did not seem excited. He did not seem desperate. He looked focused, completely focused. The cockpit door closed, and for the first time since the hijacking began, nobody could see what he was doing. A few minutes later, a warning light appeared on the instrument panel. It showed that the rear stairs had been lowered while the aircraft was still in the air. The plane suddenly shifted upward for a brief second, as if some weight had violently disappeared from the back of the aircraft. The pilots looked at each other, but neither of them said anything. Somewhere over the forests of the Pacific Northwest, in freezing rain and complete darkness, the man opened the rear stairs of the plane, stepped into the storm with a bag full of money, and vanished into the empty night. When the plane finally landed, the rear stairs were still hanging in the cold night air. Rain hit the metal steps. Wind moved through the empty cabin, but the man was gone. The crew walked slowly through the back of the aircraft, as if they expected to find him hiding somewhere between the seats. Instead, they found only a black clip-on tie, a few cigarette butts, and the strange silence left behind by someone who no longer existed. The money was gone, 2 of the parachutes were gone, and the man who had spent hours sitting only a few feet from them had disappeared into miles of rain, trees, rivers, and mountains. At first, many people believed he could not possibly have survived. He had jumped at night, in freezing weather, into rough terrain he could barely see. He was wearing a business suit and loafers, not survival gear. But the more investigators studied the case, the stranger it became. The parachute he chose was not the easiest one to use. The instructions he gave to the crew sounded specific, and he seemed to know details about the aircraft that very few passengers would understand. Search teams flooded the forests below. Helicopters crossed the mountains. Men on horseback moved through mud, rivers, and dense trees. But everywhere they looked, there was nothing. No footprints, no torn fabric, no broken branches, no body. It was as if the storm had swallowed him whole the moment he touched the ground. As the days passed, the mystery only became larger. Sketch artists tried to recreate his face from memory, but every witness described him almost the same way: middle-aged, average height, dark hair, calm expression, ordinary. There was nothing memorable about him except what he had done. The newspapers could not stop talking about him. America had seen hijackers before, but this was different. Most hijackers wanted to escape to another country. Most wanted attention. Most made mistakes. This man had stepped on a plane with no disguise, threatened everyone with complete calm, taken the money, and then disappeared without leaving behind a single clear answer. People became obsessed with the idea that he had committed the perfect crime. The FBI spent years chasing names, rumors, and theories. Former soldiers, criminals, paratroopers, men who had vanished shortly after the hijacking, men who suddenly had unexplained money, men whose faces looked vaguely similar to the sketches. But every lead eventually collapsed. Some suspects were too young, some were too tall, some had no parachuting experience, others had alibis that could not be ignored. And every time investigators thought they were finally close, the mystery opened again. One theory claimed he had military training because of how calm he stayed under pressure. Another claimed he worked in aviation because of the technical instructions he gave to the crew. Others believed he may have worked as a cargo loader, an engineer, or someone who spent years studying airplanes in secret. But there was always one problem. Nobody could explain why a man smart enough to plan everything so carefully would jump into a storm wearing nothing but a suit and dress shoes.
Some investigators believed that was exactly the reason he died. They imagined him landing badly in the darkness, breaking bones the moment he hit the ground, lying alone in the freezing rain while the money scattered through the trees around him. But if he died that night, why was nothing ever found? Years passed, and the case slowly transformed into something larger than a crime. It became a legend. People told stories about him in bars, on airplanes, in police stations, and around campfires. The man who vanished into the storm no longer felt completely real. Children grew up hearing his name. Reporters wrote books about him. Amateur investigators spent years trying to solve the case from their basements. Every few months, somebody, somewhere, claimed they had finally uncovered the truth. Then, almost a decade later, something strange happened. In 1980, a young boy was digging in the sand beside a riverbank when he uncovered bundles of cash buried beneath the dirt. The bills were wet, faded, and partially destroyed. But when investigators looked closely at the serial numbers, they realized the money came directly from the ransom given to the hijacker. For the first time in years, there was physical evidence. The discovery shocked everyone because the riverbank was far from where many people believed he had landed. It forced investigators to rethink everything. Had he survived and buried the money there himself? Had the river carried the bills for miles through the wilderness? Had someone else found the money and hidden it? Or had the man never landed where people thought he did in the first place? Even the money created more questions than answers. Only a small portion of the ransom was found. Most of it was still missing. If he survived, where was the rest of it? No one had ever spent large amounts of the stolen money. No one had ever deposited suspicious stacks of bills. No one had suddenly become rich in a way that could be connected to the hijacking. It was as if the rest of the cash had disappeared with him. The more investigators searched, the more contradictions appeared. Some experts insisted he had military parachute experience. Others argued that no experienced parachutist would ever jump under those weather conditions. Some believed he chose the wrong parachute by mistake, proving he was not trained at all. Others thought he intentionally selected certain equipment for reasons nobody understood. Even his famous name was not real. The ticket had been purchased under the name Dan Cooper. But because of an early reporting mistake, newspapers began calling him D.B. Cooper instead. The wrong name spread across the country, and somehow it stayed. The real man disappeared so completely that even the fake name became more real than he was. By then, the story had already changing in the public imagination. He was no longer just a hijacker. He became something darker and stranger. A ghost in a business suit, a man who walked into one of the most controlled environments in the world, took what he wanted, and stepped out into the void without ever coming back. Some people admired him for that, not because of the crime itself, but because he seemed to embody something people rarely saw: absolute control, absolute calm. He never shouted, never lost his temper, never acted like a man cornered by fear. He looked like someone who had already accepted every possible outcome before he even boarded the plane. That may be one of the reasons the story never died. Most criminals leave behind chaos. D.B. Cooper left behind emptiness. No body, no confession, no final mistake. Just a tie, a few fingerprints that never led anywhere, some faded bills buried near a river, and a man-shaped hole in history that nobody could fill. As the years went on, dozens of people claimed to be him. Some made the confession on their deathbeds. Others told their families strange stories after drinking too much. A few even smiled for cameras and insisted they were the man from the plane. But every confession eventually fell apart. The timelines did not fit, the faces did not match, the details were wrong, and still people kept searching. One suspect was a former soldier with parachute experience and a history of bitterness. Another was an airline employee who understood aircraft systems. Another was a man whose wife believed he came home injured on the night of the hijacking. Every suspect seemed convincing for a little while, and then the evidence disappeared beneath them. There were moments when investigators thought they had finally found him. DNA tests, fingerprints, old photographs, witness interviews. But every path ended in the same place: nothing. There is something deeply disturbing about the idea that a person can move through the world so completely unnoticed. He sat beside strangers, smoked cigarettes, ordered a drink, spoke politely to the crew, and yet by the end of the night he had become impossible to trace. No verified photograph of him exists beyond the witness sketches. No recording of his voice survives. No one knows where he came from before he boarded that plane, and no one knows where he went after he stepped into the storm. That final image may be the reason people still think about him. A man in a dark suit standing at the rear of a shaking airplane, rain hitting his face, wind pulling at his tie, a bag full of cash tied to his body. Nothing below him except trees, mountains, rivers, and darkness. Then one step forward, and then nothing at all. For more than 50 years, investigators, journalists, and ordinary people have tried to answer the same question: did he survive? Maybe he died within minutes of the jump, alone in the freezing wilderness while the storm covered every trace of his body. Maybe he survived the landing, buried part of the money, and disappeared into a new life under a different name. Maybe he spent decades quietly watching television documentaries about himself, listening as strangers tried to turn him into a myth. The most unsettling part is that every possibility still feels believable. Because the truth is that nobody has ever proven he failed. Nobody found his body. Nobody found the parachute. Nobody found the rest of the money. And nobody ever found the man who entered that plane looking so ordinary that nobody bothered to remember his face. That's what makes the story feel impossible. Not the bomb, not the money, not the jump. The impossible part is that in a world full of cameras, records, fingerprints, and witnesses, one man managed to walk into history and then vanish so completely that even now, nobody can say for certain whether he died in the forest or escaped into another life. Somewhere in the darkness above the Pacific Northwest, a man stepped out of an airplane and into one of the greatest mysteries that has ever existed. Over time, the mystery became bigger than the man himself. People stopped talking only about who he was. They started talking about what he represented. A man escaping the system. A man disappearing from a world that tracks everything. A man proving that sometimes, even in the middle of a crowded airport and a commercial flight full of witnesses, somebody could still become invisible. That idea terrified people, because if someone like him could vanish, then maybe the world was not as controlled as it seemed. Maybe there were gaps in the system large enough for a person to fall through forever. The FBI eventually closed the active investigation after spending decades and millions of dollars chasing answers that never came. Boxes of evidence remained, photographs remained, witness sketches remained, but the case itself never truly ended. Even now, people still search the forests where he may have landed. Old parachutists still debate whether the jump was survivable. Retired agents still revisit the evidence and wonder if they missed something small. Because mysteries like this create a strange kind of gravity. They pull people in, and the less they are explained, the harder they become to forget. Somewhere in that darkness, there may still be bones buried beneath old trees. There may still be scraps of parachute fabric trapped beneath the soil.
There may still be stacks of money hidden in places nobody has searched. Or maybe there's nothing at all. Maybe the storm took everything. Maybe the rain erased every footprint before dawn. Maybe the rivers carried away the evidence piece by piece until there was nothing left except questions. And maybe that's why the story still feels so haunting.
Because the man never returned. The money never returned. The answers never returned. Only the image remained. A dark figure standing at the back of a plane. A burst of freezing wind. A staircase opening over the void. And then silence. For a brief moment before he jumped, he must have been completely alone. The engines roaring around him, cold air rushing into the cabin, rain hitting the metal walls of the aircraft, the money strapped to his body, the darkness below waiting for him. Nobody knows what he was thinking in those final seconds. Maybe he was terrified. Maybe he regretted everything. Or maybe he felt something closer to freedom than fear. Maybe that was always the plan. Not the money, not the headlines, not the mystery, just the feeling of disappearing. Because some people spend their entire lives wanting to be noticed, and others spend their entire lives dreaming about becoming impossible to find. D.B. Cooper may have been both, a man who created one of the most famous mysteries in American history by making sure that nobody would ever truly know him. And after all these years, that may still be the strangest part. Not that he hijacked a plane, not that he jumped into a storm, but that he succeeded so completely that all that remains is an empty space where a man used to be.